Yeah, can you hear me okay? Great. Hi, thank you very much for coming today. It's an honor to be here. And I think I'm going to start my talk with an apology to all of you for frightening you in this hideous way. It wasn't fair. It was a scary ambush, and I set you up unfairly. Although at any time in the talk, if any of you find this scarier, I'm happy to put the sheet back on, so you'll be safe. Actually, I haven't just come from a costume party. I stole this from my 5-year-old son to make a point about how we deal with reality every day. And it's also a cheap prop for what may be or not a ghost story that I'd like to tell you. But first, a quick observation. When I walked out here just now, all of you undoubtedly shared an instantaneous and common reaction to seeing me, which was ghost, or bad imitation of a ghost. From there, an instant later, a split second later, you all began to tell yourselves your own ghost stories based on your own experiences and your own emotional makeup and other factors. For example, some of you may see a ghost or be told about a ghost and experience fear or uneasiness. You may have seen the movie Poltergeist as a child, or you may have had some experience in a haunted house in your life. Others might feel kind of happiness. Remember happy memories of Day of the Dead in Mexico, for example, celebrating one's dead relatives, or if you're from my country, dressing up as a child and going trick-or-treating. There we go. Is it still there? Great. I told you I nicked it from my kid. My first choice was actually the witch's dress, but it was tight in the hips. My point is, again, that we all react differently to stimuli, right? It's natural. It's part of what makes us all individuals. But what I want to talk to you about is what happens when you don't even know what the stimulus is. How do you react? What stories do you tell yourself? What emotions do you bring to bear? And what can you learn from it? Because I lived in circumstances like this for more than 4 years in a house in Mexico City, haunted by something. And I'm not here today to actually try to convince you that I lived in a haunted house. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. I don't have the proof, and more importantly, I don't have the certainty, even after all these years, about what was there. Before I go any further, I just want to show you a quick picture of the house I lived in. That's me 12 years ago when I was just moving in, and that's probably the cheeriest corner of this enormous mansion that I was living in. So you can imagine from there what the rest of it looked like. You could also probably imagine that, if ghosts were to exist in the way that we typically imagine them, this would be a pretty good place to haunt. But again, what haunts me to this day is the uncertainty about what I experienced, and I'm actually very grateful for it. The first encounter, let's say, I had with the unexplained things in my house happened fittingly in the night. I was in bed just after I moved in, and I was asleep, and suddenly a locked closet door went boom and went crashing open and swung there on its hinges. And like you just now, I sat up in my bed, my heart racing, and I had this initial reaction, which was ghost. And my emotional reaction right after that was scary, very scary, because I had seen Poltergeist as a child, and probably one of the scariest things I could imagine at that point in my life was a big old house filled with ghosts. Again, I'm not here to convince you that any of this happened or not, but ultimately this turned out to be a great experience, but a confusing one, because the very next incident involved a gift. I had been discussing a particular book in my office with my assistant at the time, The Problems of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. And the very next day, when I came up to my office, I found a copy of this book sitting on my computer, on my desk. And I hadn't put it there, and my assistant hadn't put it there, and no one else had been in my house. So we searched this library, which I was using as my office, and we found the spot on the shelf where this book had been, and it had clearly just been removed. And we couldn't find a plausible, logical explanation for this. And it was this small gesture, but at the same time, it seemed really wonderful to me, and I took it as a gift. That's how I interpreted it. But it was confusing because now suddenly, was I supposed to think ghosts scary, or ghosts nice, or ghosts philosophical, or ghosts at all, because I actually didn't believe in them. And yet here suddenly I was in a country that very much did. And my New Mexican friends were telling me I had them. This went on for 4 years, up to the very last day that I lived in the house. I saw things large and small take place. I saw a bag of fruit move across my desk on its own. I had many friends and colleagues who swore they would never step back in my house. Serious people. A woman who worked for the Mexican National Office for Human Rights stormed out one day claiming she'd seen figures from the 19th century milling about in a mirror on my wall. I had another friend who said she saw a boy come down the stairs, actually just the legs of a boy, and disappear into the kitchen. No torso, no head. I mean, scary stuff. But the most interesting thing that happened to me personally, and it's sort of embarrassing to tell you because I already know you're going to think I'm crazy, is that I'm pretty sure I was possessed one night. It was just before 9/11, and I, again, was in my bed. And the only way I can describe it is to say that something entered me. And it cried through me for about a minute, and then it went away, and it was the strangest thing. I could never explain it. But it's my experience. And again, I'm not here to try to make you believe me, only to share with you the lesson that I tried to wring from all of these experiences. The first was that, I'll back up. When all of this began, I said to myself, this can't happen actually, because not only am I living in this big house, but it's the NPR bureau. I was the reporter in Mexico City for National Public Radio. And I've got to work here, and I need not to be scared suddenly, especially if I'm on air live, right? So I figured I had 3 options to deal with this. I could run, that is move, which was going to be a big pain in the neck. I could fight, which would have entailed hiring a Mexican shaman to come in and do a cleansing, which is very common in Mexico. Or I could make friends. So to help me decide, I went off on a week-long Buddhist meditation retreat in northern British Columbia. We Buddhists sometimes do this when we have perplexing issues before us. We run off and sit alone in the woods for a week or so. I actually wasn't alone on this retreat, and I had a chance to ask a teacher what I ought to do about this situation. And what I was told was that, if I was really going to embrace this Buddhist ideal of working for the benefit of all sentient beings, that had to include invisible ones. I thought that was not the answer I wanted. So I was told that if something is going boo in my house, it's probably happening because whatever it is suffering to some degree. It's angry or desperate or trying to communicate, certainly not at peace, otherwise it wouldn't be spooking me and my friends. So I was ordered back to Mexico City to make everyone feel at home. So that's what I did, and it was really hard. It was embarrassing. You can imagine me walking around this big empty house, room to room, usually with a glass of mezcal in my hand, giving welcoming toasts, to the thin air, If they were invisible, I felt completely transparent because I knew I was lying. I didn't want them to be there, but this was the practice, and it was bumpy in the beginning. But it was also sort of intriguing after a while because I like this idea of confronting what scares you. And beyond that, embracing the fear itself, letting it in and then letting it go. And I know that sounds like such a kind of new age cliche, embrace the fear, let it go. But I learned over time that you could actually do that. It's a real action that you can begin to do if you practice it enough. And after a while, something really cool started happening in the house. First, it became easier to live there. Whatever was there, and I seemed to have reached some sort of truce or agreement. They stopped spooking me so much, and the house seemed to become a lighter place to be in. And then also I started bringing all of this to work with me. Not the ghosts, the practice of trying to embrace fear and to understand that fear itself isn't going to hurt you. And this served me on many occasions in Latin America. For example, once when I was surrounded in an abandoned train yard in southern Mexico, I was working on a story on illegal immigration to the United States from El Salvador all the way up, and I was surrounded by a notorious Central American mara, or gang, made up generally of thieves and often of killers. Or on the front lines of an insurrection in Haiti during the coup there in 2004, when I was trying to interview very nervous fighters with their fingers around the pins on grenades or around the triggers of their rifles. or just dodging an ambush that was set by a local Mexican mafia in front of my house in Mexico City one night because of a story I was working on. In all of these moments, I was able to think back on what I was experiencing in my house, this sense of becoming familiar with the fear, and that actually helped me sort of keep my balance in those crucial moments and not really just sort of lose my head. And I always sort of gave a silent nod during these moments or just afterwards to my invisible roommates, and I would think of the lesson that I was interpreting, at least from all of this, which was to welcome the trouble before you. Not because you're an idiot and you're looking for trouble, but because sometimes, at least in my line of work, trouble finds you, and there's no way around it. The second thing, and probably more important thing that I took from this experience, was that we don't always have to figure everything out as journalists. We don't always have to find the answers. We can live without answer. That's a difficult one in the world of news because news consumers don't only want to hear about what's happening, but they want to be offered solutions. They want to understand how the world's vexing problems can be fixed. And most journalists, myself included, tend to be hardwired to want to provide those answers. It's part of what we do. In my case in Mexico, those issues being drug trafficking, mass illegal immigration to the United States, rampant corruption at all levels of government. But I think learning that we don't always have to provide the solutions as journalists in some ways makes us better at what we do, because we often can bring a kind of neurotic drive to our reporting, this neurotic drive to explain it all and to get the story right and to offer solutions. But when we do that, sometimes we bring preconceived notions with us to help us reach what we may unconsciously already see as the answer. And I think that's a disservice, and I think sometimes what happens is we oversimplify complex problems. An example off the bat of that would be that drug dealer is a bad guy. He probably is a bad guy, but he is almost always certainly more than that. And when we simplify, again, I think we do a disservice. In the case of my country, oversimplification has led to the disproportionate incarceration of many young African Americans for minor possessions of drugs. And on top of that, with our 3 strikes and you're outlaws, many of those young men are now in prison for life for what I would ultimately consider minor offenses. Thirdly, one thing that I learned from my spooky roommates was that I could also suspend judgment a little bit more as I was working. And that is simply because you can't judge what you can't explain. You might be thinking now, how could anyone work like that? I mean, what you're describing used to be taken care of with a simple operation that we call lobotomy, But actually what I'm not suggesting is that we cut off or cut out fear, or we remove the lobe of the brain that allows us to make judgments. We need to be able to do both of those things, not only to be a journalist, but to get out of bed and cross the street in the morning, right? What I'm suggesting is that we can see through fear and our own judgment a little bit. We don't have to take them so seriously. They're not absolutes. I think ultimately what I'm describing is keeping an open mind. And when we keep an open mind, something inevitably must come in to kind of fill that new space, right? And for me, that's a sense of wonder. And wonder is, for journalists, one of our greatest assets, because when you go into a story with an open mind, the people you're interviewing very often can pick up on that, and they'll open up more as well. And even when you have to interview somebody who's dead set against opening up, you often find better ways to get the information you need from that person, simply because your perceptions are sharper when your mind is open. As we get older, the sense of wonder, becomes more elusive. We try to categorize things more and more, make the universe fit into our worldview, into our comfort zone. I still thank a bunch of ghosts whose existence is still uncertain to me for helping me keep my eyes and my mind open. The sense of wonder is something that slips away from us over time, but to this day, I wonder about what these ghosts were in my house. Were they really ghosts or not? And that very process itself helps me keep wonder alive. Thank you very much.